Got it. I think it's probably okay.
Thank you.
I feel like it's fine. But, okay.
We're recording.
So we need to approve the minutes from the 15th. Anybody have any objections, concerns, questions regarding the minutes from last week? Okay, lots of approve. Okay, great. Okay, Pat, I think I'm going to hand it over to you to tackle how we're going to dive into the matrix this morning.
Okay. So again, we have an hour to do the matrix and the carbon budget, and whether we're done or not, we're stopping because we want to make sure Kai has her full 2 hours to work with you all, and we're not going to cut into that. So we're going to stop at 5 of regardless. So let's try to work efficiently if we can. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is, Abby, there's a few things in the matrix I'll note. Let me just kind of explain. So thank you all for your comments. I apologize. I left someone's out last night, so I resent you a slightly revised version this morning. There were a few things that came up. People added a few additional actions in, which are in red. I don't know that they're particularly controversial, but they were added. There were a few language clarification changes on actions, which I put in red, so you can see those changes. And then there were some places where people suggested, even though they didn't meet our kind of ranking criteria of all high, at least no more than one low, there were some things that people suggested they wanted elevated to our priority list. Probably not a ton, but probably 6 or 7 in total. So that's also noted in red in the kind of notes section. I'm thinking maybe, people haven't had a lot of time to look through that. We don't have a lot of time to go through that. So I wonder if people just need to take a look. We're going to be writing from this next week. We can certainly come back if anything people disagree with. But I do think there were 2 issues that we knew were kind of issues we really haven't talked through yet. I think we should talk through that came up in some people having some disagreements. And I want to actually probably raise those first, Abby, if that's okay. Have our conversation about them, and then we can see what time we have left to do other things.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, so let me find them. All right. Okay, so this is under adaptation, which is tab B. These are really process issues, but important ones that came up. So there was a suggested recommendation that there should be a state central planning office to better, more comprehensively address land use and land use issue changes. There were folks, and we've had this kind of discussion in part before, that no, we don't want a state central planning office. This is really something that should happen through plans through existing state agencies. We don't need to create a centralized and different state planning office. Some people think we do. So I think we just need to decide what to do with that question of a central planning office for the state. The second one, which is different but similar, was creating an interagency office of climate. And there was debate about whether that is kind of, would sit under the governor, for instance, or would sit, within an agency. And we need to kind of talk about that one too. I have a thought about how to keep that one simple. If we agree there should be an interagency office of climate, we don't have to describe exactly where it should sit at this group. That's really more of a climate council issue, but we can get to that. So those are the 2 bigger ones. There's another one around the existence of this group beyond December, but we can get to that if we have time. So on the state planning office, I want to kind of get a sense of whether people strongly advocate that, yes, we need one. No, we don't. We need to kind of see where we want to land with that one. And we need to have a bit of discussion to kind of see what we want to do with it. So people weigh in. Alyssa, over to you. Alyssa, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm calling in for audio from a phone, so I just had to figure out the *6 thing. My suggestion. Oh, you still can't hear me?
No, you're good. We can hear you. You're good.
Okay. My suggestion is that for some of these late-breaking discussions that we don't have enough time to get through all the nuances of getting consensus around, is that we agree to include the key differences of opinion in our description of them, because I just worry there's a number of these that we're going to potentially take too much time arguing about. And this is a really easy one to say it was suggested, and here are the pros and cons, and there wasn't consensus in our group about. And I think the next one that you mentioned is also a good candidate for that. But in terms of this first one, I think my personal opinion is against it, but I do want to kind of include this recommendation for the the kind of the potentially maybe a parallel to the Climate Council, but kind of an interagency coordination group. That's all.
What do people think about Alyssa's idea that we just kind of note that this was an idea, that here's a few of the pros and cons in our comments, and we, at least for now, leave it at that? What do people think about that idea?
I guess I really don't have an opinion, Pat. I mean, I think it's fine. It's you know, of course, I hesitate because you know it's just shuttling a decision off down the road a little bit. But I agree with Alyssa's and the note here. Whoever made this comment that they're opposed to a central planning office, because I've seen too many instances where that can actually lead to less effective work because the central office is less connected to the field, kind of thing. So that's my comment.
Okay. Other thoughts on this for now?
I think it's a little difficult because I think some of the people who have, I'm not sure we have the people here who have the strongest feelings or the most knowledge about sort of how this would move forward or not. So I would second Alyssa's thought that I share the concerns about both of those offices being created due to witnessing how Act 250 currently works and the further centralization of that, and how that has made it less accessible for communities on the ground. So I think as long as this is an idea that's come up and these are the thoughts around it, I would be okay with that. I'm not sure I want to put like our wholehearted stamp of approval on any of those at the moment.
Charlie, you're on mute.
Sorry, I could be wrong, but I think there's a bill currently in the legislature to do this, to create a state planning office. And so another option here might be to frame our recommendation around sort of, you know, if a state planning office is to be created, kind of leave the framework for that with the legislature to say, then, you know, direct them to focus on these issues or use these like filters in their work. So not like, we're not going to get into the weeds about creating the office, but it's kind of like, if one is created, direct them to consider these principles in their work, kind of a thing.
David?
Well, I'm late to this conversation, so apologize, but I'm a little confused. Like, a lot of our recommendations involve trying to figure out what's the right balance. How much land do we want in forest? How much do we want in agriculture? How much land should be developed? Where should that development occur? How do we classify the different kind of levels of intensity of forest management? And you know, we don't necessarily need a new state agency to do that, but how is that going to happen? Because that's not going to happen town by town. There's some entity at the state level needs to be involved in kind of holding, running a process, getting input, looking at the science and the maps, and start to make recommendations, and ultimately have some process for adopting decisions around that. So how are the folks that are opposed to a planning office or a statewide entity to do that work? How would that work happen?
Do people have thoughts about that? Yeah, Brian, over to you.
Yeah, I feel the Vermont Climate Council was established by the policymakers to provide that degree of process and guidance. The timeline that informs this first climate action plan and its need for publication, I think, limits the vetting and discussion of how that happens. Future implementation through agencies and other programs that are identified by the Climate Council, I think, is how this gets moved forward on the ground. So to that end, I wonder how the Climate Council and its subcommittees fits that role at this time. I feel that, some other points that were made, the more process you add, the tougher it is to implement on the ground potentially. I appreciate the need for coordination, but I do think, perhaps the Climate Council can play that role the way it's constructed.
So maybe let's see one first, other comments or thoughts on this?
The one thing that just to respond to David directly, my concern isn't, or I understand what you're saying about there needing to be an organizing body. I agree. I think more my concern comes from the term centralized, because in my experience living where I do, when things become centralized, the access for those of us who are further flung geographically becomes less and less secure, and funding tends to be directed to a central location versus put into the communities where it needs to be. So again, to Charlie's point, I think maybe it's not so much like for or against, but if the Climate Council decides or the legislature decides that this becomes something they think is appropriate, these are the principles that we feel should be employed in its creation to ensure equitable access, et cetera, maybe based within the guiding principles.
I mean, we could even be more explicit about not just principles, but to David's point, like, here are some things they should look at as well.
What I might suggest, and just building on Alyssa's point and the comments made, is that we would note that they're in there, that there are some pros and cons, and if they were to happen, some considerations. And then what we might do is that's a little bit more than the matrix as design can hold. But when the people write the sections, this will be under tab B, then these might be, we're going to have this table of stuff we prioritize, right? And then we might have a section that goes below that, though it's not explicitly called out in the form, to say, here's a few things that we disagreed on and why, and some considerations. And we could fold those into the writing of our section of the CAP that people are going to, we'll talk about at the end of the meeting today. So I think I've jotted down some good notes of the comments people made. So does that sound okay for a way forward for both the Central Planning Office and the Interagency Office of Climate? Is that okay? Anybody disagree with that approach for moving this forward while still being in disagreement for now?
I don't disagree, but I have a problem with kicking anything down the road. So if we can be as clear as possible about actions or strategies or suggestions, I think that would be the best way to handle it.
One thing we asked, Judy, that really good point. We asked Jane, who reluctantly gave this answer, I think, which is we said, well, do we have to be done next Friday or Monday the 2nd when we hand these in? And the answer is yes, but we're going to hand to the Climate Council a draft of what we've done, but they're going to give you comment, and we have more time in November to refine that before it's done. So hopefully we can begin to get this in writing and then have some more discussion, Judy, as you said, to see if we can get a finer point to it.
Could you explain to me, I was under the impression that we were supposed to give recommendations. Could you explain to me why we're prioritizing our recommendations? It just seems if we're supposed to give recommendation, we could give the whole list. Why are we taking all this time to prioritize them?
I wish Jane was here because I'm not sure I can, Judy, I'm not sure I can answer the question very effectively.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer either. It's something, to be completely honest, I've really struggled with. It's been something that was handed down to us.
It just seems like a waste of time to, and yes, I'm using the word time. It seems like a waste of time to work on prioritizing them when our goal was to make recommendations and we have them.
The only thing I'm not really privy to all of the discussions above us here. The only thing I know, I think I heard some discussion about was they want the climate plan to be kind of focused, clear, and as quote unquote concise as possible. So part of this was probably trying to get to those things that are either more actionable or more important, frankly, just to keep the document readable.
And who is they?
I think it's the Vermont. I think the direction for the prioritization came from the Climate Council or the steering committee. I don't know which, Abby.
I think,
So, can I jump in
yes,
Correct.
here just to share within the body of the Global Warming Solutions Act itself, NDSA Section 592 D1 outlines how within the Climate Action Plan, the specific initiatives, programs, and strategies contained in the plan shall prioritize the most cost-effective, technologically feasible, and equitable greenhouse gas emission reduction rate pathway adaptation preparedness strategies informed by science and technical expertise, along with a number of other requirements in there. And so I feel that the direction from the legislature to do a degree of prioritization is included in the charge for drafting the climate action plan itself. And I think that's where it's come from.
But it doesn't say it's our job to prioritize it.
Well, I would think that the subcommittee charged with looking at agriculture and ecosystems and has the subject matter expertise and lived experience in this section would want to offer some degree of opinion as to, we've come up with all of these. If we have to implement a climate action plan, what are the most effective, immediate, and important strategies that this group would like to see considered by the Climate Council? So
Well,
I just have this.
I just have this feeling we're going to move it on and they're going to prioritize it the way they want.
Well, and Judy, maybe this doesn't fully answer your question, but probably your point. I think when we look at kind of the matrices, we have, I would say, probably 3/4 of actions are prioritized as we've kind of done it. And so a lot is going forward, and nothing's, of course, lost from the piece itself. And to your point, how much time we should wrap ourselves around the axle on this is the fair point, because we already have a lot, and we have, there's a climate council above us, which may be doing its own thing too.
So are you going to add the comments that were made 3 weeks ago on biomass?
Judy, specifically on that one. So on biomass, let me get to that. Can I hold on that one second? Because we have to get to that. Yes, and we have I want to frame that as a separate thing we're not done with. Yes, we're not done with it, and talk about that in a second. Is that okay?
Thank you. Yes.
No, absolutely. Okay, so for now, for these two, we're going to take a crack at describing the disagreement and work maybe beginning on some principles, which we'll have to probably vet more than once with this group in the matrices. Then that actually does lead me to the next one, which is biomass. So my understanding is, and folks, please correct me if I'm wrong, this has been an important topic to talk about, strong views and sometimes differences. There's a smaller group who's trying to work through an approach that addresses the range of views on this group, and they've been working and they're not there yet. And so what I would suggest, but I want the group and all of you who care deeply about this to tell me what to do here, or tell Abby and I what to do, is that if that group, you're trying to reach an approach, and I wonder if we gave you another week to try to do that, and then you would bring that idea to the group next week, and we let you work that for another week, and then we have that come forward to the group for final discussion. Charlie.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Yeah, I think we had a great conversation earlier this week, and I think we're kind of starting to come together around some stuff, but like you said, there's still a lot of stuff to work out, details to hammer out, and we're like far from there. So if we can carve out time, I would be okay bringing something back next Friday to the group.
How do others feel about that approach?
As I said before, I'm not a fan of kicking things down the road. So the comments that have been carried at the bottom of the page were all agreed upon 3 weeks ago. And I think those should be placed in there.
Judy, you're referring to, is it, there was, I have like under tab C, there were two things on biomass at one point. They're in yellow now. I wasn't sure what to do with them. I don't know if you're referring to those or other ones.
I don't have it in front of me, but I would say at least those, yes. We need to get them in there if we've already agreed upon them. At least then we have something to build on.
And I wasn't clear whether we had agreement on what's now, like, I think it was ID'd originally as 52, and then it has another one, so I call it 52B. And I was thinking, Judy, because I think this one's an important one. I think you all, from what I hear, your interest, you all need to say something about this in your report. And I think since we have a little bit of time as we're writing to work on this issue, we do have until next week. If we could give you all a week to see if you could further refine that, we would definitely include it in what we send to the Vermont Climate Council on November 2nd.
Well, it includes more than just biomass as a topic. I mean, as you all saw when Charlie submitted that paper on low grade wood, it brought up a series of conversations about the procedures, the methods, the language, the philosophy that foresters are using and being taught in academic institutions. And that needs to be addressed, that needs to change, or we're not going to be able to successfully look at biomass in the way Charlie wants to look at it.
I think the hope in terms of getting at the terminology, language, philosophy questions, that was, at least as I came away from it, that was some of what we were going to try to talk about today as we framed out the forest plan that's similar to, right? I think that's one of our equity screening actions, and that it was in creating more detail and going through the equity screening around creating that strategic plan for the forest economy and the forest sector that we could encapsulate those recommendations there, that, these are the ways that we think this needs to be approached differently and framed out differently. And these are the, the language needs to be examined and reworked, et cetera. Am I misinterpreting earlier this week?
That's fine if it's not another thing that gets kicked down the road.
No, I think we're hoping to discuss that at 10. That's
Okay.
That's one of the pieces that we were going to work through with the equity screening.
Okay.
And that might be, I think if Kaya's okay with that, I think that's probably the first one we should do if people are willing, and if Kaya's willing, but Kaya's our guide here. Charlie?
Yeah, I just think that kind of the biomass conversation is nested within that bigger one. And so just want to kind of, as we talk about it, be clear what work needs to happen and what kind of scale that we're talking about. Because I agree that we got to have that conversation, and that has a bearing on the biomass one. But they're two separate conversations in a way, if that makes sense, in terms of the outcomes as they would relate to like what we're going to put forward in a recommendation.
So can we?
Yeah, and was this the moment where I was supposed to ask if we did have consensus as a subcommittee regarding our feeling that it is the thought or will of this subcommittee that we are not comfortable recommending the further promotion of large scale, Charlie, help me with the language.
Yes, that's
so
exactly right. This is where you're supposed to ask, Abby,
Okay.
how we feel about recommending the expansion of large scale electric biomass plants similar to McNeil and Reigate.
Yeah, I think that's something we need to kind of agree on consensus. I guess my hope was that we could do that within the broader kind of framework of everything happening in that space. But if we want to talk about that specifically today, by all means, let's do it. I think that like that consensus, which I think we have reached, is also part of kind of a bigger conversation that is not ready for prime time with the full group, because we don't have the language nailed down in a way that we're all comfortable with. that's ready to be discussed.
Well, can we test this? We haven't officially I mean, we can test this and then understand it'll be embedded in this other conversation. But I think it's worth testing, Abby, if you're okay, others, is essentially, Judy, if I have right, is, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, like no expansion of any large scale electric biomass such as McNeil-Rygate across the state. No more. Is that the right language?
Yes, and that criteria will be established. If they can't meet the criteria to be cleaner and more sustainable, then they'll be closed.
So anybody first have questions about that kind of framing? Again, the group can work to kind of put this in clear language for next time, but I think we want to test the proposition today. So anybody have questions about that first? No expansion and existing facilities can't meet, rigorous criteria, they would be closed. Anybody have questions about that before we see where the group is?
I guess without knowing what the rigorous criteria is, it's hard to make a determinative statement on that. Like in principle, I completely agree. Like that was in something that I drafted, but God, I feel like Joe Manchin here, which is horrible. Like I can't agree to that until I know exactly what it is. That's like the worst thing in the world. Oh my God. But like, yeah, I do think we're starting to kind of put things back together when I think at this point we might need to keep them separate until we know exactly what we're talking about.
Well, let me take the first one first. And I think, does anyone support expansion of industrial scale biomass for electricity like McNeil-Rygate anywhere in the state? Does anyone support expansion? Okay, so I'm not hearing any support for expansion of those kinds of facilities. Then I think, to not call anybody names from West Virginia, if we're not quite clear on kind of what it would mean to say, and if not meeting rigorous standards, existing facilities should be closed. The smaller group is I think, working the language there some, so maybe we can return to that next week when we look at kind of the whole. And we're still going to talk about biomass in the equity conversation at length in just a little bit too. Okay, so at least we're clear, no expansion. All right, and we have more clarity to bring as we go then down that kind of chain of events.
Expansion that definition includes new facilities, not just expanding this specific facilities that are there.
Yeah, Judy, that's a good clarification. I think we should say when we mean by no expansion, we mean neither expansion of existing facilities and no new facilities.
Correct.
Right, okay. Everybody clear with that? Thank you. That's a good clarification.
I also, I hate that I have to be the person that says this, but I agree. I think we should definitely frame out these recommendations in the language that we all agree on, and I am all for that. I just want to, I guess, put a damper. I'll throw the damper on that. This is the best that we can. I mean, we have no idea what the Climate Council will say. We have no idea what the legislature or the governor will say regarding this. But I do think that if this is the will of this subcommittee, that we should have that reflected in the language and recommendations that we put forward, and, hope that they will be taken seriously.
And, much like you've done around some of the kind of measurement stuff where this group felt strongly things were being left out, and then you had folks within this group who went to other forums and advocated vociferously for that. This may be the same thing, right? And that's partly the purpose of the council, is to have potentially sometimes some hard conversation.
So I just want to flag that Alyssa's put a few comments in that I think are, so she asked, should we recommend some facilitated forums and research on this topic to identify environmental and social impacts of those large-scale biomass projects? And then she added, it's hard to recommend expansion without more information about specific impacts. Perhaps we recommend that any expansion of biomass electricity must be reviewed for social and environmental impacts in consultation with local Indigenous groups.
I'd like to comment on that.
Please do.
That has happened for over 20 years, and it's just like a steamroller, it moves forward. The conversation about them being the largest polluter in this state just keeps they keep manipulating numbers to show that they're net zero, which others have done the math to prove otherwise. And so it's just been a steamroller going forward, addressing all of these things you're talking about, Alyssa. And which brings us back full circle to that, their original permit was they were going to be within 100 miles, they were going to take down trees, they were going to take treetops, all the stuff that couldn't be used by others. But if you're down there any length of time, you will see truck after truck after truck of logs coming in. So they're not doing what they're saying they're doing, and nobody's enforcing the correct thing.
Judy, thank you. Charlie.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, Judy raises a ton of great points around kind of the equity things specific with McNeil and those things. I think just kind of in a general kind of large view of that kind of large scale electrical generation, from a climate impact carbon accounting standpoint, I mean, the science looks like it's not like an efficient net positive when you look at the long scale GHG emissions versus the reductions kind of thing. It doesn't really work, right? Like the way that Bill Keaton put it in an article was like, you can't have your climate cake and eat it too with that kind of stuff, right? So I think the idea there is just, if it was strictly based on those numbers, then yeah, we wouldn't want to expand it, but there's other reasons why we probably don't as well. And so I do think that coupled with this is an idea of, and this is where the full recommendation comes in, are there other scale or model applications that we can look to as potentially kind of not replacement, but other things. So thinking about smaller combined heat power models. So it's kind of coupled with like, what's a better application here as well from just a strictly greenhouse gas emissions standpoint.
So I think, both from it just doesn't bias anything, one, and two, it has significant impacts statewide. And as Judy said, people have been trying to fix them for a long time without comfort. I mean, I think I want to kind of see if our idea stands that, again, no expansion of existing and no new large scale biomass electricity plants in this state. If I said that right, Charlie.
Yeah, and if I could just add one last point, just for the record here, that, and I'm not saying, I just want to add this to the conversation as we talk about things, is as we look to transition away from these things, there is an impact to, and I'm not trying to put the economy in the center of our conversation, but there is an impact to the forest products economy in terms of, if we shut down, transition, and move, there's ancillary kind of impacts there that do affect communities and people that we got to take into account as well if we're trying to create a completely, good, equitable, full things for people, environment, communities. So that kind of back end does need to get taken into account as well. Thanks.
Judy.
Yes, Charlie, that's true. But as we know, a lot of the wood being used here is not coming from Vermont.
Oh, 100%. How many days have I been like, why the hell are you giving us this BS when there's trucks coming from New York with no checks and balances?
Exactly.
No, I agree. But I guess, yeah. So I'm just saying that I think that we can create a better system holistically around this, because we keep talking about pieces and parts of it. And I just kind of want to bring us back to that, like, it's a systems approach that we really have to tackle, which makes it much more complex and thorny. But I just want to remember that system has to be fixed, not just an individual part.
And it may be in the language you all work on for next week that you could mention the transition piece as a part of that story. Okay, so again, I want to affirm no expansion of existing or new large-scale industrial biomass facilities producing electricity in the state of Vermont would be a recommendation of this group, and many more things to follow, to Charlie's point about what would happen at a different scale in a different way. And we'll see this all in writing, hopefully next week.
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
All right.
Okay.
Good.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. There's just one other thing before we go to carbon budget I wanted to cover under land use F. Charlie had developed some language around UVA. And I think it's all in there, but Charlie, I didn't know what else we needed to do with that. It's elevated, it's all in there. It's a little bit bulky. We may have to clean it up, but I don't know if there's I wasn't sure what else we needed to do with that language.
No, my only comment there was just that right now we've got like a bunch of stuff crammed into one cell that I think can be better teased out into individual actions that can make it just more clear.
Okay, so I can take the matrix and just turn like one through whatever it is. I'll just turn that into separate actions underneath that strategy. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and then there might be some language clarifications we have to make, but that was my only thing, is that right now it's kind of a bulky, condensed, odd action. And so we just need to separate it out because it would be more implementable with different.
Okay, I will do that. All right. So again, biomass to come. We need to figure out some language for the kind of process pieces around planning and kind of interagency climate group that we will figure out in the writing of our draft for the cap. And I'll fix the UVA piece. Anything else on the matrix people want to mention before I think we move to the carbon budget? Okay, so Abby, I'm not sure the carbon budget, to turn it over to you or Ryan, or whoever wants to talk about that next.
Definitely Ryan. Or Allie, but this, yeah, I don't have anything on this. They do.
Well, I'll jump in then. We got a bit of time. Ali Kasiba's on the line, and definitely, she shared the presentation last week and is one of the authors for the forest budget portion found in the report. We'll work to drop a link to the report in the chat that was shared by the contractor, and then what the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee has before it today is this draft review of the report that was conducted by the Agency of Agriculture and FDR, Ali, on what was contained within the budget. And we've worked to provide a narrative summary of the high points of the report, what it is, what it isn't, and how it's an important stepping stone to future research to inform emissions inventory and carbon inventory work moving forward. The document in front of you is structured in such a way where it provides a narrative about who wrote it, who it's submitted to, what it's supposed to do, how it's different from the ag emissions inventory, how it can help inform questions of getting to net zero by 2050, that the manager of land is an important consideration in this. These lands are not static. Management can influence it. Land uses can change within this sector, and that it's a new body of work. This is something that very few states in the United States have endeavored to tackle, and it really helps provide a good framework to contextualize the current state of stocks and fluxes from different ag forestry and other land use sectors, as well as sets up future research to best inform a periodic inventory of carbon in Vermont, and how that can also support the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So, the findings and recommendations are narrow. The findings are simply from the report, speaking to the sectors that were quantified as part of the ag, forestry, and other land use sector. You'll find this at the bottom of page 2. And the recommendations are consistent with what I think this subcommittee has been talking about for a while now. Recommendation 1 builds off of the RFP for AFOLU greenhouse gas emissions RFP that was approved on the 12th of October, 2021. And we worked to provide 5 specific areas of research that we feel at a minimum this RFP should endeavor to look at. 3 of which are informed by the emissions inventory work, and 2 of which come from research that's needed to better track land use and cost and feasibility analysis of remote sensing technologies that can help with land use identification and transition, as those data sets are could be updated for more accuracy and can better help inform a more accurate inventory. The second recommendation put forth in this report, this summary, is that of a carbon inventory, a carbon forecast, and future updates to that methodology. It is one that seeks to build off of what's put forth in the carbon budget report, with 2 sections on specific methodological considerations that are either gaps that, based on time, scope of work that the contractor had, weren't considered in the first round, or upon reading the carbon budget report, there are some, for example, possible issues of double counting, how just how some of the data was presented, maybe getting more towards gross emissions and gross sequestration by sector in addition to net fluxes. And so just trying to make sure that for posterity, when the RFP comes back and when work happens to, conduct another update to the carbon inventory, those data and methodological gaps or recommendations are included. Part 2 of the second recommendation is, this spans page 3 to page 4, seeks to, just clarify some perhaps technical gaps that exist within the paper that we want to just note. Don't think it takes away from the broader point, which is management is an important, consideration for how land is managed and the relative influence of either sequestration or emission from that land use. But then also just some, higher level questions about, in this column, these numbers don't add up as an example. So just wanted to make sure that future readers of the carbon budget report understand that it's been reviewed and identified to have those technical gaps that should be updated. So this is the recommendation letter, just a memo kind of outlining what was found in the report and 2 specific recommendations to the Climate Council moving forward, one of which has already been approved. So I'll toss it over to Ali, not sure what I missed or anything else you want to bring up before we move to discussion.
Oh, that was great, Ryan. Thanks.
A quick question, Ryan. When do these recommendations have to go to the Climate Council? Are they do they need to go this week? Are they part of our
Tuesday.
overall recommendations? Tuesday. Okay.
So this is not what will be in the climate action plan for the carbon budget report and future carbon inventory. That will be a separate narrative. This is a standalone memo from the subcommittee that, in effect, commissioned and asked for the carbon budget report to report out, yep, we got the report, we like it, we think that it gives us what we asked for, here's how we want to use it, here's what it doesn't do, the litany of things I tried to describe. And so it's a memo essentially to the Climate Council saying, what this memo says is it's good, we need to build on it, and think that the RFP for AFOLU emissions inventory is supported by this work and needs to look at its considerations, and that we think that this inventory and carbon budget should be conducted on a periodic basis and updated based on some of these methodological and technical and data needs that this group has identified.
So questions or comments on this memo, which would be on behalf of all of you to the Climate Council, separate from our developing recommendations. Questions, comments?
Yeah. Am I being recorded? Am I being asked to share my question? Or?
Who's speaking?
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. My name is Susan Morse. I'm the founder and science director of Keeping Track.
Susan, this is just the committee discussion for now. We do have a public comment coming up in just a few minutes, but it would just be among the committee members for the moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, can you just park me where I belong then?
No, you're good. You can see right where you are. And if you want to make a public comment, when we get to that, you can hit *9 on your phone and that will show a hand raise. So you're just fine.
Yeah, I won't know. So I just have a regular landline here. So
Oh, gotcha. No problem.
I don't have a computer at all. So I would just let me know because I would love to participate.
Will do.
Yeah, we'll call for a public comment in about, well, as soon as we get through this. So hopefully in like 2 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions or any concerns about forwarding this memo on your all behalf to the full council about the carbon budget?
Hey, this is Alyssa here. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, sound good.
I just wanted to thank Ryan and Allie for leading this, and I haven't read through this draft in full, and so I just love to do that before it gets sent in. Do you want to give us a deadline of like Monday at some time in order to get you comments if we have any? I'm not sure that I will. I just wonder what makes sense, Ryan and Allie.
Is that doable, like noon on Monday? Does that give you enough time to edit and get it off? Ryan, what's doable?
Absolutely. I'm certainly open to that. If the committee is willing to accept the recommendations and any, future editorial or, technical error corrections within the report Monday at noon, that absolutely works for me.
Okay. All right. So noon Monday, get Allie and Ryan any kind of final sort of editorial comments on the details. I think general recommendations, hopefully you all good enough, but some edits that might be helpful in terms of the details.
Yeah, if folks feel I don't feel like we should change recommendations outside of the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee meeting today. And so if folks feel there's gaps there, additional details they'd like to see added, I think that today would be the time to have those discussions. I appreciate folks haven't had a full time to read it. But I do think, also we get another swipe at it in the framing and report out in the Climate Action Plan itself for the carbon budget section.
Any other comments on this for now? Any concerns about forwarding it? Judy, you're on mute.
I agree. We need to have time to read it all before we can comment on it. And I understand your urgency, Ryan, for discussion now, but how do we discuss it if we haven't finished reading it? It's 67 pages long.
Oh, it's the report's been out and shared with the committee for about 2 weeks at this point. The recommendation letter is 4 pages of text, so it's a bit synthesized and just seeks to try to summarize some of the big themes that we've learned from the carbon budget report. So obviously those two documents have to be taken together, but the one shared with the committee is
Judy,
the link that was put in the chat.
For everybody's sake, Ryan put the link for the memo, which is about 4 pages, and then Allie put the link for the actual report, which is, like you said, Judy, it's like, I don't know, big 70 pages or whatever it is.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, there's only so many things we can read in a week, and this wasn't the only thing we've been given to read.
So if we,
I'm there with you, Judy.
I guess the question is, either the subcommittee can decide to forward this on your behalf. If you decide you don't want to do that, it may be something that, the Agency of Ag can bring forward. I don't know how best to do this. The snake is being stuffed with lots of stuff and it's really hard to digest it all. So I don't know how you all want to proceed.
I personally would like to have time to read everything. And you said Monday at noon, right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
So I think, why don't we do this? Why don't we do Monday at noon? People send any kind of detailed comments. If in fact someone reads this and goes, I absolutely object, then I think, what you'll hear, Ryan, on that point from you and Allie is that. And I think what you would need to forward to the Climate Council is the recommendations plus the objections, if there are any major objections. I think that's, given the time we have, that's the best we have to do. And as Ryan, as you said, there's a little bit more time to process this as we get to the final report. But that way we can still move forward. We can get the issues in front of the council. And if there are objections by Monday at noon, you can forward those as well. How does that sound?
Sounds fine to me. That follows a lot of process, and just wanted to clarify that the carbon budget document, that 60-odd page report, it's a final report at this point, and so we're looking for comments and feedback on the recommendation letter,
Right.
which is the 4-page memo.
And it is if you have time, which none of us have, it'd be helpful to read the final report you said, Ryan, and then look at that in light of the recommendations. Okay.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Right. All right. So noon on Monday, either just comments on the recommendations in terms of just nuancing the language. And if you have any major objections, let Ryan and Allie know, maybe CC the co-chairs, Billy and Abby, and then that'll be forwarded, whatever it is, to the Climate Council on Tuesday. Abby, any other clarification on that?
Nope, just want to put a really fine point on the fact that the carbon budget is at this point non-negotiable, as I understand it. It has been, right, Ryan? That's the point you're trying to make. The 67-page document, I believe, has been
yeah, I consider that a final report. We attempted to notate some gaps that we found in the latter part of the memo, just for posterity, looking for feedback on the memo that's presented here, and attempting to elevate some of the bigger picture outputs of the report. It's a long report, and there's a lot of important questions asked, and essentially we need more research in this space. This is a very new area for mandatory reductions for sectors to have a component that includes the ag, forestry, and land use sectors, and the framework that's provided by this carbon budget is a good stepping stone to do further research, which, as I've shared, recommendation 1 has already been approved by the Climate Council. So this is just lending additional support to that and providing some clarification as to what that RFP can and perhaps should look at.
Okay, let's, Abby, I think we have about 3 or 4 minutes for public comment. Let me just say a few words and hand it to you, Abby, to do this. I would encourage the public, if you've already made a notation in chat, please don't repeat it verbally, because we really want to get to the equity discussion. If there's an important succinct point you want to make at this point, great. If you could refrain so we can get on to equity discussions, we would appreciate it. And there's another public comment towards the end of this morning. So Abby, with that, I turn it over to you.
okay. So members of the public, anybody have anything to share at this point?
Hi, yeah, go ahead. The person on the landline, go for it.
Yes, thank you. My name is Susan Morse, and I'm with Keeping Track. And let me start by saying I applaud and appreciate all of you and what you're doing. You really are doing great work, so thank you for that. I just want to give us a little context here, and by way of asking you to be mindful of a larger purpose, if you will, even than you are already very aware of, I'm sure. And that is that we're in a tough spot, this planet and our state, biologically. And I'm going to refer you to E.O. Wilson, who is internationally renowned as a biologist. And in his book, Half Earth, he talks about the irony that the only hope for our species in today's very, very damaged world is a human effort commensurate with the magnitude of the problem, as he puts it. And the mass extinction of species, extinction of genes, ecosystems, and so on, pandemics, world war, climate change, all the above, they're all interrelated at this point and very pressing. And I just want to conclude by saying what he said, and I'm going to quote him directly. To those who feel content to let the Anthropocene evolve towards whatever destiny it mindlessly drifts, I say, please take time to reconsider. To those who, like yourselves, are steering the growth of reserves worldwide, let me make an earnest request. Don't stop, just aim a lot higher. And on behalf of Wild Forest Vermont, with our plea that you consider embedding in this Climate Council list of recommendations the consideration that wildlands be included in current use, and that landowners who want to permanently conserve their lands for biodiversity, for climate resilience, and all the rest, please aim a lot higher. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Susan, for that comment. Jennifer?
Thanks, everyone. Just two things quickly. One is for Ryan and Allie, if there's any public comment on the letter, the 4-pager, how should that appear to you?
Abby, any thoughts on that? I don't know whether the best way, Abby, I don't know, is whether just, Jennifer could send an email to the co-chairs and do that by Monday noon as well. And then they'll certainly, at least read it, and whether they can accommodate or not, I don't know. But how does that sound, Abby?
Sure, or to Ryan and Allie and Billy and I can be CC'd, however that works. But certainly
Ryan.patch@vermont.gov is my email.
Ryan, why don't you just put that in the chat if you would? That'd be great. Thanks.
Sure.
I'll just send it to Ryan then, and if that's okay.
that works for me. It takes out the middleman.
Yeah, I don't want to flood anybody's inbox. Thank you so much.
Another comment, I think, Jennifer.
Yes. And the other one was just asking for some specificity for the UVA recommendations. And I think that, no, that's not the one that I wanted. Sorry about that. I guess what's confusing about the UVA recommendations is that there isn't any specific language that says what will be included and what won't be. And I think that when Charlie put that in, it refers back to some existing language. And so I just think it would be good to be clear about what would be included and what wouldn't be in terms of non-harvested forest land. Thanks so much.
Okay, I will write that down, and I'm sure Charlie is taking that in as well, and we will do our best to get those recommendations out as soon as possible with the language, with the specificity. Zach?
Yeah, thanks, Abby. Good morning, everybody. This is Zach Porter, and I'm calling into you this week with Standing Trees, which is an organization that I know has had representation here before from a variety of volunteers, and that's how I'll be here going forward with this group. And I appreciate the conversation that's gone on today. Very grateful to Charlie and Judy for working together on biomass. I'm excited to see where that goes next. I think that's going in a promising direction, and wanted to touch for a moment. Well, first I'll just say I also want to echo Jennifer's comments. I, too would love to see, if there are more specific recommendations that have emerged around use value, and hope that might be something that could be shared with the public before any other recommendations are made to the Climate Council on those lines for a discussion at this meeting, maybe next week or whenever it makes sense. And then I wanted to just touch on the carbon budget for a second. There hasn't been a lot of time to discuss the carbon budget, and the paper that undergirds the forest related sections of it, which is the Dugan et al. Paper that came out earlier this year that I'm surprised we haven't had any discussion of here in this subcommittee. And as I was looking through it, I was pretty taken aback by some of what's in there. And I know that, according to Ryan, that's a final document is what I heard him say. Well, that's concerning to me because the modeling that went on in that paper, the scenarios that were considered, not one of them looks at what the carbon impacts would be if the state followed Vermont conservation design recommendations for the way that we should manage our forests going forward, including the 9% target for old forests. And I am just kind of stunned that this, somehow, didn't make it into the carbon budget modeling. The Vermont conservation design report is actually more was produced more recently than the Vermont FPR. I think kind of scenarios that the Dugan et al. Paper is based on. And so I'm just confused why VCD, this really fantastic document that Vermont FPR and Fish and Wildlife together worked on, why that wasn't used as a basis for some of the modeling in this carbon budget. And it's disappointing. And I hope that there will be a chance to make a recommendation in your letter that goes out on Tuesday to this effect. So I see that you know, Ali Kasiva has her hand up, and maybe she can help us understand why some of that modeling is not included in here. So thank you, and yeah, appreciate the chance to comment.
Abby, I'd rather than have a discussion because we're eating into Kai's time. I want to kind of just take the comment and let's move on for now, if you're okay with that, Abby. We still have Rachel's hand up, I know, but I think a back and forth right now in the carbon budget we probably don't have time for.
Can Ali just add some clarifying?
Abby,
I am gonna let Ali go. I think this needs to, yeah, Ali, go ahead.
Yeah, just really quickly, I just want to say Zach's totally right that there is future modeling by those scenarios. That was not included in the carbon budget. The carbon budget is not modeling harvest scenarios. It's just what has happened on the ground based on inventory data and harvest, like wood product harvest. So what I took from Dugan was just her estimates of how much carbon is in the wood that's harvested, and that came from actual mill reports. So that's all that I used the Dugan data for. So certainly recognize that, just want to clarify.
And if I can just clarify, when I say final report, it doesn't mean that's the final process that the state will use moving forward for carbon inventory, accounting and forecasting. Rather, that is a final report. There are a lot of notes in the methodological section about additional data needs and modeling needs.
Rachel, do you have a quick comment you want to offer before we move on?
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I just am concerned about, and I haven't been so engaged with this process, so I don't know whether this has been discussed or how it fits. But within these discussions in Europe, for example, there's a big push by some organizations, which I think is really important, to separate the land use accounting from the rest of the carbon budgeting and accounting that's happening, especially with respect to other sectors. And so that's what I just wanted to bring into the picture, because otherwise we end up using our land use as essentially an offset, whether it's commercially or just in the accounting ledgers, as an offset for ongoing fossil fuel pollution. And that's the fundamental problem with that people have faced. So there's some very good resources on separating land use accounting from the rest of the sector accounting. And I'll put some links in here. And again, I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm struggling with the time thing, Judy. Donna, if you have a quick comment, please go ahead and offer that.
Thank you. I understand you have a lot to get through, and I appreciate all you're doing. I just want to reiterate Sue Morse's comment about, aiming high and higher, as high as you can go, and that I am not sure what your instructions were as a subcommittee, but I encourage you all to not consider how hard it will be to get anything through, but just go for the recommendations that would be the best possible scenario, and not to water down language saying we hope this will do something, or in the language, just to say it strongly, and it'll be up to the people who receive this to knock it down, and the politicians and the state issues around things. But I don't really know how you've received instructions, but I encourage that. And I also appreciate all you're doing. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I think the attempt has been to put forward the recommendations that we have consensus on based on the expertise at the table in this group, and hope that it will be treated with the knowledge that it came from a group of people with expertise, and that the recommendations will be adopted. But to your point, we don't have any control over how the Climate Council or the legislature or the governor chooses to interpret whatever we put forward. So
Right.
appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate all you're doing.
Thank you. Okay, so Kaya, shall we dive right in? I want to welcome Kaya Morris to the table. We're going to dive into equity screening today for the next almost 2 hours. I am not entirely sure how we're moving through this, so I'm just going to turn it over to Kaya.
Hi, all. I'm happy. I apologize. I'm having internet issues, as you can see. So if I can have just a moment while my computer finishes rebooting. But what we are going to try to do to the best of our abilities, this is kind of a slightly audacious task in wanting to go through 4 of the different recommendations that you're looking to lift up and put them through utilizing the equity screening tool. So what I will be doing once my computer cooperates is I'll be sharing screens and we will go through looking at 4 different areas of focus. We have payment for ecosystems, food security, we're looking at river corridors, and we're looking at a forest sector plan. So we'll start with that. So I guess I can punt it a little bit for a few minutes while I try to get things working properly. To have a conversation around building out. The first one we're going to address is going to be the forest sector plan. And so again, what we're going to do is we're asking for the task leads or the project leads on those specific areas to give the briefest of summaries, just to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about, so that we can then go ahead and start utilizing the tool with the guiding questions to help us through our conversation. So I am looking in this moment, I believe, to Judy and to, wait a minute, what's going on with my screen? I'm looking for a few folks to help guide us through kind of the thinking around the forest plan, which I believe comes out of thinking of a similar framework and engagement process that went into creating the farm to plate most recent plan. So if I could get a little bit of support with that while I get back on to my computer and not through my phone, that would be great.
So I don't know, Charlie and Judy, if you want to kind of describe the idea, just so people have a sense of it, and then there may be questions people have, and then Kaya will jump in to kind of walk us through the key questions.
I think in general, she nailed the broad frame of it. It was to try to create a plan for call it a forest sector analysis, for lack of a better title now, which kind of parallels the process that the Vermont Farm to Plate plan went through, thinking around collaborative engagement from all parts of the sector, supply chains, everything, to develop a very similar, essentially, action plan looking at the next 10 years. So happy to hand it off to Judy. And I know that Jake was really involved with the Farm to Plate plan. And if he has any insight into kind of the parallels here or process comments, that'd be helpful too, maybe.
Judy.
Yeah, so, and my concern has been, as I said, around language, philosophy, and methods that foresters are recommending, that they're using, and the equity that needs to be involved in their processes. And as you know, I was upset when the low grade paper came out, and for many reasons. Number one, that it didn't come out earlier. And number two, that it's directly connected with the early conservationists and eugenics. And it's the plan that's been followed for 100 years now. And so we, in order to have an equitable anything in forestry, we have to come up with recommendations for that process and language. Otherwise, there's no equity at all.
I think Judy's right as far as that's a conversation we really need to have. I am a little concerned that in terms of the original recommendation of the Farm to Plate parallel plan, I think that what Judy's getting at is it's a broader context. It's a little bit separate from, I guess, the initial recommendation.
I believe that it is and it isn't, Charlie. I appreciate where you're
like it's nested again, right? Like I think
Right.
I think the plan is here, and what Judy's talking about is here, and I'm not sure we can get all of this into that. I think so. Yeah.
We can aim high, Charlie.
We can aim high. We can aim high. Totally. I just want to make sure that we don't try to like put too much into one package and have the package just fall apart.
Well, I think that's a little bit of part of this process of what we're going to do right here is we're going to go through thinking, if you were to bring forth this sort of a recommendation, what are some of the foundational elements you're going to need to see that happen in the design of this actual, because the plan itself is the product that comes from an entire process where there becomes a shared and a common language around how we're talking about the different issues that are at hand. It's around bringing together different voices, different stakeholders, different regions to have folks have an understanding of those that have a vested interest in this work and are deeply invested in carrying forth this particular work to create a plan that is robust and is reflective, has the just transitions principles, is built on equity and all the things that we're trying to do today. So I hear what you are saying, Charlie, and I appreciate what Judy is saying as well. And I think that as we go through this and recognizing our truncated time to do so today, we're going to start our thinking around this. We're not going to land there today. We're not going to finish this in its entirety, but I believe and I have good faith in the folks in this room that we'll be able to start doing some really great thinking around that. Does that sound fair? Okay, fabulous. Something I think that's going to be very important for us to acknowledge and to recognize in this moment. One of the pieces that we're going to be doing in each of these screenings, I do have a few ground rules that I do want to share with both the committee again and with members of the public so that you'll be aware. We are going to be working off of a screen where I'll be taking notes live hand, and I'll be trying to guide you through deeper thinking on certain areas. We are going to have a sort of time stop at a certain point. So Jen, I'm going to look to you to the best we can. I know we lost some of that time at the beginning, but it's okay. It is what it is, and it's okay. Again, recognizing this work's going to have to happen outside of today, 100%, right? To go further, and it will, again, not likely be finished in time for the finalized cap, but that is part of the both critique and the assessment that you'll have to have in your language as you speak about the work that you've done as a committee, right? So for members of the public and others, I am going to ask that as much as possible, and I know how hard it is, to refrain as much as possible from having conversations within the chat. It makes it difficult for folks who are taking notes. We have Jen, who is here to help support, does incredible detailed notes, but we might miss your words. And as the facilitator, I also may not have the ability to stay both in this space and to engage with the chat. It also helps for folks who are joining by phone or for different accessibility issues to ensure that everyone can be engaged in the conversation. So I know this is not ideal, but I do want to ask and request of that so that if you have great thoughts and ideas, they don't get missed because they disappeared in a string of chat. So I hope that that's another fair ground rule that we can go through. And so what I will do now is I'm going to pull up, I'm going to share screens for the right one. We're not doing that one yet. So what we're going to do in this, can everyone see this okay? I don't have any boxes or funky windows that are blocking your vision. Okay, thank you. I got a couple head nods. Appreciate that. All right. So again, I also, because I'll be working in the document, may not have direct access to seeing, keeping track of your expressions to know how folks are working within the space, but we're going to do the best we can. I promise. So again, what we wanted to do is, you'll remember just as a quick refresher of how this document looks in and of itself. It begins with the most briefest of summaries. It could be one sentence, it could be a paragraph, it could be a couple of bullets. So at this point, this is what we have. Development of a Vermont farm to plate style parallel plan for the forest sector in and of itself. So you may have more that you'll want to add to that as this starts to continue to grow. And thank you all for your patience through this. So we're going to go through, there's different questions in here. We're not going to get to them all, but we will talk about impacted and frontline communities. We will go through a process of trying to identify those. We're going to talk a little bit. The document also asks questions around analyzing burdens and benefits. Okay, then it goes into thinking about how we are ensuring an equitable and a just engagement, right? And then we're also going to think through funding and data. What do we have? What don't we have that we'll need to be able to have confidence in the plans that we're putting forth? What are the implementation and outcomes going to look like? What are we actually thinking about how this will happen, and what are our measures of success as we want to deem them, correct? So then what these questions, again, are going to help us to be able to do is to start answering the questions that we may not have fully yet vetted. We may not even realize that we need to know this information and have to, as I keep saying in all these places, I'm going to use all the same analogies. We're throwing up our bat signal to say to our broader community partners, to our communities themselves, to our research partners, and so on. How do we get the information we need to, again, do this to the best of our fidelity, right? So then where the scoring rubric comes into play is, again, you're going to have a low, a moderate, and a high. So this is the point where you go back and it ties into each of the individual questions. So thinking, once we've gone through our exercise of who are our frontline and most impacted communities, how do we feel that we're there? Do we feel good about that list? Do we want to improve on that list? Is it not missing things altogether? Is it identifying all the wrong people, all the wrong impacted communities? How is that? So this is your chance to also give your own progress report about what you feel like you still need to do more work on, or you would like to see more work on. Because again, this is not all on you. It is not possible for it to be on the folks here in this committee. So what else is needed for you to feel like these are at a place that is of comfort enough to at least go back to the public and say, did we get it right? Does that make sense for folks? Okay, thank you. I appreciate the head nods on occasion when I can see them. So, all right. So let's dive in. So if we are to think about what are our impacted and frontline communities within this process, who would you say? We're going to popcorn it around amongst committee members. Feel free to unmute and kind of give me some guidance on that. Are there particular, so if we're going to be building out a plan, again, who is impacted by us not having a plan, and who will be impacted by trying to support a different path forward? So which frontline and impacted communities might be most impacted, or currently most impacted by not having a plan in place that is comprehensive in scope and reflective of their voices, as well as those who will become potentially even positively benefited by the plan's existence? Any thoughts? Oh, go ahead, Charlie.
Thanks, Kaya. I guess real quick first, maybe that just happened. I was gonna say, could folks mute themselves if they're getting some static on my end at least, but it just ended, so maybe that got fixed. Impacted communities, I would put out that anybody involved in the forest products economy would fall under an impacted community.
So people who are involved in the forest products economy.
And when I say that, I mean everybody from landowners to managers to loggers to folks that are someplace in the supply chain, from primary producers, secondary producers.
Okay. Consumers, are consumers part of the economy in this, and who are the?
Yeah. I would say at the end of the supply chain, you've got the consumer. Yep.
Okay. Are there any regionally based, socioeconomic, ethnic groups? Are there, again, if we're thinking about all living things, what else is impacted by, Judy?
I would add Indigenous folks, farmers, homeless folks living in the forest, especially around the riparian zone. And those living downstream from places where there aren't riparian zones, and
I'm sorry, what kind of zones?
Riparian.
Oh, thank you.
And what does that say, plumbers?
Did you say plumbers?
No.
I thought I heard you say plumbers. What did you say?
No, I don't know what I said, but it wasn't plumbers.
Okay. Plumbers can be, I'm like, hey, we can get that specific. I'm fine with that.
Well, and also headwaters and rivers and streams, all of those things that if the forest isn't there, it doesn't filter before it ends up in the river.
Okay. Thank you. David?
And we're talking about like who's impacted by the development of a forest sector plan.
Or lack of, I thought she said too.
Or lack of a plan. I mean, so, I mean, all the rural communities that are dependent upon forests, whether it's for, forest related jobs or it's outdoor recreation. But our rural communities in the forested parts of Vermont, which is most of the state, is of course impacted.
Abby.
I'm gonna take a stab and guess that a forest plan probably impacts the forest and her occupants of all various types, sizes, creature profiles, etc.
Can I get you to go a step further, or anyone else? Are there currently particular forest corridors or forest areas, regions that are currently most negatively impacted by us not having a comprehensive plan right now, where we're seeing maybe it's clear cutting, or maybe we're seeing that erosion, or?
I mean, I guess for me, I would just offer that the southern part of the state, I think, is currently experiencing an increase in logging, et cetera, and development that is, as I understand it, not being captured or regulated in any way. And certainly I'm seeing the impacts of that.
Thank you.
I'm sure there are more.
Thank you, Abby. Cheryl?
I don't know if public is allowed to now, or is that good, or should I wait? Well, it's really quick anyway. Can you hear me? It's interior forest species of all types. And also, yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Should I wait? Is there a public comment just going forward?
Yes, it's up. I will say it's up to this committee on how they want to utilize the expertise of the public or the opinions of the public in this space. So, but thank you for that. Are there any other forest ecosystems or regions that are currently you have concerns about? There's why there's concern. There's a reason why we need a plan. Who's not being addressed yet? Go ahead, Judy.
Fragmentation of our forests is problematic for the animals who want to travel from one piece of forest to the other.
Okay.
And to that too, you could add like crossings, like turtle crossings and salamander crossings, if there were culverts and they could use those opposed to crossing over the road.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. All right. So I don't want to move past where in the forest ecosystems, where in the state we have issues. So far, southern Vermont's getting love. There's nowhere else that we're worried about right now. Do we have any issues we're seeing in the Northeast Kingdom? Do we have anything happening?
Yeah, fragmentation is happening everywhere. In Burlington, there's a forest at Centennial Fields, and of course you have the forest at the Intervale, but there's no way for animals to get from one to the other.
And I'm asking this just in case people have things top of mind, recognizing again, as we're saying this, I'm like, that's an important question, right? Like why are we like, why are our hearts breaking over this right now? It's clearly not just happening in a vacuum, and there may be areas that are feeling this more acutely. We may or may not have identified that, so that's where we need to, again, throw up our bat signal and say, somebody's paying attention. Who is like feeling this most acutely right now, if that makes sense. So Centennial Woods and Intervale. Okay, that's great. Okay, so you see a little bit of how that flows, right? Oh, go ahead, Abby.
Sorry, I think Judy or Charlie did say farmers, but I would add farmers in here just because farmers manage a significant portion of forest land.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, that was the plumbers.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay,
Toggle that well between those two, Judy. I'm not gonna lie. Although
that was great.
It was a lot of poop.
That was great. Great work. Teamwork. That's what we're saying here. So, okay. So again, you can see a little bit about how this particular part of the exercise works, right? So as you'll get there, you may want to even, again, speak with more specificity. Are there particular communities that are directly impacted? This is where they live. Like this is, when we're talking about Rust Belt economies, there were specific communities, frontline communities where they were hit because of particular industries that shut down. When we think about shutting down coal, we can name these are the towns, boom, 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 that are directly impacted by their economy and by their lived experience. So that's the kind of detail we'll want to think about when we're thinking about this plan and recognizing who has a stake in this and who wants to be able to be a part of ensuring that you're building a plan that's reflective of what needs to happen. So yeah, no pressure. No pressure.
Put communities in there. I mean, I guess we have rural communities, but I assume it's broader than that.
Yes. I'm going to write a note, get specific, please. And then perhaps that information came from the community engagement in ways that might be surprising to folks that we don't know. So, you know, again, fishing through those pieces will be helpful. Or not fishing, I shouldn't say that. Okay, so looking at the next question, so we're going to keep moving just for the purposes of time. Yes, we have such little time together. So how do these communities experience inequity today around these issues? So we did talk a little bit about this. I mean, I would be interested to hear how are our houseless populations, those individuals who are living in the woods, like how are they experiencing these inequities of what's happening within our forests right now? How are our landowners, loggers? How are indigenous? So on and so forth. I did see, John, you have your hand raised.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, right off the bat, they're experiencing inequity because they're not listened to. They don't have a forum to express their concerns. You know, they don't have avenues to reach the decision makers, the forces in power, the political operatives, kind of thing. So that's one thought.
And so, and just to be clear, who is the who? Who's the who in this? Who's experiencing
the people experiencing inequity, the people who are on the who are not. Maybe not directly, they're not the actual loggers, but they suffer or are impacted by the co-effects of the economic operation.
Okay. Thank you. Charlie?
I would just say that in general, the current framework of the forest economy that we're working with is inequitable in that we're similar to ag. I used dairy as a great example. We're basically just slaves to global commodity markets where we can't set our price or direct our future. So without any kind of independence from that or reformatting of it, yeah, we can't create an equitable future for ourselves.
We're dependent on the global economy to do everything from setting your pricing to what you're actually.
Yeah, just global commodities markets and all the things that are involved with them create inequities.
Okay. Thank you. Iris.
I have one that's really specific, but for people who are experiencing houselessness, at least in Burlington, they use logging in some cases as a means to prevent them from having shelter. There was a group of people who were living somewhere in South Burlington, and they cut down the trees in order to make sure that they couldn't stay back there. So I think that that's a big inequity. It's very specific to the houseless population.
Okay, so they're literally deforesting just to keep people out. Thank you for that. For some reason, I can't see more people now. I don't know what's going down. Okay, there we go. That's better. All right, thank you. And then I lost my order. I still see David, Abby, and Judy, and I'm sorry if I'm going out of order, but it just messed up on me. So, is that a new hand, David?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I just kind of trying to get a little more specific, building on what Charlie was saying. I think the people that are most affected, the communities most affected by the global collapse of commodity markets, for instance, the shutdown of the pulp and paper mills across the Northeast and the effects of that have disproportionately affected people that were not necessarily college educated. They're doing the logging, the forest logging, the trucking jobs, the related work around that was tended to be lower paid anyway, but now it's increasingly as that they're absorbing the brunt of the economic dislocation in those communities. So even to the extent that we have opportunities to do logging and the related work, the compensation for those folks is not keeping up with the cost of living. So people that are doing that work, I'm not sure what the right term is, but people that are economically marginalized in rural communities that depended on a forest economy are disproportionately impacted and don't really have a strong voice in the public policy arena.
Okay. So unions were or were not a part of their process?
I'll defer to others about how much how much of that's been unionized. I don't in the short time that I've been working in the forest arena, I've not seen the unions present.
Yeah, I think you're right, David.
Thank you. I saw Abby and Judy.
This is similar to the issues that exist in the farm sector with land access issues, and the fact that both for outdoor recreation and for land access and ownership, etc., BIPOC communities don't have equitable access to land and safe outdoor spaces, either for ownership or recreation.
Okay. Judy?
I would like to add the animal community is being impacted. The air and the water is being impacted, and the birds in the air, and so on and so forth. You get that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would also like to mention non-timber forest products. So the availability to harvest food or materials for material culture has been reduced, and to the point where you actually get shot at sometimes when you try to harvest in places you've harvested for.
Is it 11:30, our thing?
Decades. And for those without a home, that also ties in with food. In the Interville and Burlington, there are large populations of people living there, and the land has been polluted so badly they can't harvest the natural things that they normally would harvest.
Charlie, is that an old hand? Okay, just checking. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I'll be right with you, Alexandra. I'm just trying to finish this note. Okay. Okay, thank you. Alexandra?
Yep, just to add the climate lens on this, forests and folks that work or depend in forests, harvest wood products, non-timber wood products, already experiencing the effects of climate change. So they will be forests, and people that work on them will be most impacted by climate change.
I could just say to Kaya, I appreciate all your typing, but you left off water. Animal community, air and water and birds negatively impacted. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure, thank you for catching that. And again, that's also why I do also have Jen on the other side as well, taking double notes, and you'll see her notes are incredibly detailed, much better than what I've taken right here. So I promise. So that's why we have a team. I appreciate you raising that up. So we're gonna go through maybe one more question on this, and then move to the scoring rubric part, so you can see a little bit how it fits. So here is some basic questions. This is it really. It's meant to be a yes or no, if you can get to a simple answer as such. So do we believe that in building out a forestry plan, that this will maintain things as they currently are? Will it make them worse, or will it improve the status quo? So does it just keep things as they are? So we pull people together, we raise the voices that haven't been heard, we develop strategies that are reflective of the hopes and needs and demands of the folks, and then we create this work. Does this work in and of itself? How does it keep things as they still are? Does it somehow potentially worsen the situation for folks, or does it actually improve the situation? Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my answer is predicated on having a successful collaborative process, but this basically sets the stage to definitely improve the status quo. I mean, that's the objective of the plan. So.
Yes, Judy.
I agree with Charlie. It depends on how it's all written out, but I don't think it will work if economy is number one.
I will also add in here, it's required for the implementation. It's required for adoption and implementation by those who need to make the changes, right?
Can I just tease out Judy's comment a little bit more? I think that, I would agree that like the economic driver can't be the overarching principle and frame, but I think that like, at least in my initial recommendation that I made, that this is based off of it. I mean, it really was an analysis looking at the forest products economy, kind of like the farm to plate plan looked at the farm to plate economy, and it used principles of inclusion and equity and sustainability, right? But like, I just want to be clear that like the point of this plan was kind of to look at a forest products sector and systems analysis to improve on these areas. So I just want to make sure we're not completely missing the target of what your initial recommendation was.
Okay. I appreciate that. I know Jen's capturing that in the notes, but I want to see if we have agreement on this or a different nuance that you want me to capture here. I saw Jake raised.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think to Charlie's point, and just from from the farm to plate plan, is that it's not development of the economy at the cost of environmental sustainability and social equity and justice. I think that it's really bringing alignment between those dynamics of and that in essence is the notion of like sustainable economic development, is that it's it takes into consideration the interaction of those kind of three factors. And that, we can do economic development in a way that actually improves the environment and enhances, social equity, racial justice, and those types of things. So yeah, it's not in essence, we don't have to create kind of an either or scenario.
Yes, Judy. And then we'll go on to the, please go ahead, Judy.
I understand what Jake and Charlie are saying, but there's so many underlying factors we have no control over that will have to change, which we brought up in our discussions before, the language and the philosophy foresters use. If we don't change that, there will not be social equity or environmental equity.
Okay. I saw you unmuted really quickly, Abby.
I'm just going to tell Judy that she was muted before.
Okay, thank you.
As you can see, Abby, it doesn't stop me from talking.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look now. Well, sorry, let me just put on this forestry sector. It's on the whole state, right? So, okay, so that was good. That was an important way to kind of nuance that question and to be really clear about what it's going to take for it to actually improve the status quo and for this to be a really iterative process. I can say one of the things that I've received feedback with regards to the Farm to Plate report is that there were many of the least represented communities that had been a part of it. For example, some of the BIPOC folks that had been a major part of writing the briefs. They were not really engaged except for to provide this little brief of a snippet of, can you tell us kind of what your thoughts are overall? But they were not part of the entire design process. They were not brought in. They were not compensated to be a part of the whole process, whereas they should have been. So they feel that some of the authors do feel that that work was insufficient and in some ways harmful because it was sort of tokenizing a particular voice. So that's one of the things that you will want to change and to shift. So again, some of the other questions, just to briefly go through these, I'm just going to briefly go over a couple of them that might be good for food for thought. Then actually, I'm seeing folks struggling here on the camera screen. So since we're off on our time and we're just flowing with it, I am going to give us a 5-minute break. I know if that's okay, Chair, just to give people a chance because I can see folks are struggling in these conversations. And not in a negative way, it's just exhausting. Y'all have done a lot. So there's questions here. I'm sorry to scroll, but there were other questions as well. So even within the sections that we were thinking about was the yes or no, who's going to benefit, right, from these recommendations, and how does it help make sure that the benefits will be shared, okay, amongst different communities? And it just doesn't want to change. That's okay. It's going to look crazy later. So which communities will be burdened the most by these recommendations, and how's that burden going to be shifted away? What are the long-term and the potential intergenerational impacts? So not just what happens now, what happens in 2022, we're thinking 7 generations out. How have frontline and impacted communities been a part of creating and implementing this recommendation? Really important. Okay, that's part of that process. I do see you, Judy. Let me just go through a couple more questions and then I'll pause. In what ways can Vermonters hear their voices in the plan? Again, so as we said, some folks were talking about earlier, the people most directly impacted they don't have a mechanism or a venue for being able to bring their voices into this. So is what they've said coming through clear? Did we water it down? Did we just sort of like say, oh, yep, we heard that, but we're not going to really talk about it? Is it a footnote? Is it an end note even in the conversation? And are we using plain language so that people can understand what we're talking about through all of these processes? We're going to be obviously thinking about funding. This is going to be an important piece. You have a whole science and data committee, and they want to know how to help. Okay, so what are the data or indicators that you're going to be needing in order to feel confident about this work? Can we get Can we get that support that you all need to be able to continue to build this out with the support of others and not having to do it on your own? And how are the indicators resonant for what's actually happening on the ground? And then jobs are going to be super important, right? And how does the recommendation support the natural environment? Does it promote fairness to all living things? Those are not questions that we think of at the end, but they're ones that we want to think through throughout the entirety of it. So Judy, really quickly, go ahead, please.
Yes, when you mentioned we're thinking 7 generations out, we should be placing ourselves in the middle of 7 generations and looking 3 generations forward and 3 generations backwards. Because what we do today can impact the past as well. And we have to know the past in order to understand today before we can direct the future in a good way. And your last comment, I can't scroll down,
I
but
can back up. Here you go.
the last, is there fairness to all living things? The guiding principles are all living and non-living things.
Okay.
So water and air would be included in that as well.
Okay. Thank you. And you may want to define that with regards to the specific, define that as well for yourselves for the specific initiative, just to clarify that as well. So I appreciate that. So when we get to the scoring rubric portion, this is what we're really looking at. This is the opportunity to go with those narrative questions that you've just answered, to give yourself a score. Give the work so far a score of how high or low you feel like it meets on the criteria, right? So does it meet the criteria, but still it provides very limited explanation, or there are opportunities to enhance this criteria in the proposal? It meets the criteria. There are opportunities to enhance it, to better meet the goals of the guiding principles, and that the proposal excels in meeting the criteria. Okay, so this forest sector plan, again, thinking about this, how do we feel so far about the frontline or most impacted communities as defined in the proposal? Would you give it a 1, a 2, a 3? What is your comfort level? Show me on the screen a couple of choices. Do you want to go back and see it again?
What are you saying? Our comfort level that they're going to be impacted or they are impacted?
That they're defined, that you've identified the impacted communities. You feel comfortable with the list as you have it. This is not permanent. This is just an exercise to get us to start thinking it through. So even in what we created today, in the list that we created today, do you feel like it's mostly complete? Is it still woefully lacking in several voices? Is it pretty good? We pretty much nailed what we think we want to say when we're talking about who the impacted communities are. Jake.
Yeah, it feels to me like a mid, maybe low mid, because I don't think without actually starting to reach out and engage with impacted communities, you kind of then start to identify those that you're not hearing from. And so it's never, a group of however many we are can never, I think, with confidence say yeah, we've covered it. We know exactly kind of who these communities are, without actually going through a process of talking with those impacted communities. So
that's great. Thank you for your honesty on that, Jake. Judy?
I would add archaeological sites to the list. And if you do that, I would then say it was in the middle for the same reason Jake's saying.
Perfect. Thank you. That's exactly where we're trying to go with this. Is this starting to, are you feeling this a little bit? Where we're going with this? I'm seeing so much exhaustion on people's faces and overwhelm. I see that, and I hold that with you. Okay. So this is an imperfect process, and we know that. We knew that. Y'all claimed it months ago. And this is us this is you as a group starting starting to step into thinking about, okay, now getting out of some of the technical spaces and into the greater nuances. Again, remembering that this is what the public is going to be looking and feeling. They're going to ask, did you think about archaeological sites? They're going to say, why are plumbers on the list? They will want to know all of those things, if that makes sense. I mean, there might be a reason. Maybe we aren't thinking about plumbers. Maybe we aren't thinking about them, and they might actually have a role that we didn't consider in all of this. Okay, so they might have something to say about that. So this is our way of going through that process. So Jake, is that a new hand or an old hand? Okay, I'm just going to add in really quickly on this, and then Chair, I would like to see your thoughts, or Patrick, do we have the capacity to just take a 5-minute break to give people a chance to shake it loose, get some water, and then we can come back and look at some of the other ones. We may not make it through all 4, but we're going to try. We could even just go through those first name questions, or we could choose a different set as those folks want to or need to go through it. But this beginning is a good start. Is that comfortable?
I am always all in on the strategic break.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna add archaeological and let spell check help me fix that, and then Jen will have it on the other side. So we'll take a break and come back at 11 for us all to meet. You can go off camera, stretch your legs, get some water, breathe through it. You got this.
Abby, can you remind me when the next public comment period is?
In theory, it's not until the end. We've not done an exercise like this, so I'm not really sure what our operating policy is on how, when, where to incorporate public comment into this as we move along. Happy to take thoughts. I don't have feelings strongly one way or another, I guess. Except that I know that some on the subcommittee have expressed that it can feel confusing, but.
Okay.
I kind of feel like a bad host. Because they sit here for 3 hours waiting to say something. And then they're told they can't write in the chat box. And many times their time limit to speak is cut short at the end.
So yes, I am seeing quite a bit of comments in the, I'm seeing quite a bit of comments in the chat box itself, it looks like, from members of the public. So, okay, so it looks like there's some different comments. I don't know if they need to be read onto the record. There will be another public comment period. The way that we've been doing this, that we did this in cross sector, is that we went through the first exercise and gave that was when we had the public comment period to give folks an opportunity to respond to everything that we'd done prior to this. So we do want to capture those. I can say that my particular role in this is to facilitate the conversation for the committees and to reflect those within the notes. So capturing the community components is not something that is part of how the scope works for this for me. However, it is up to the committee if the committee wants, how they want to allow the public to participate in adding to these conversations or participating in them directly as they're taking place. So that is something that I think is a little bit beyond what my particular call could be on this.
Abby, Chair, do you have a thought?
It more just, I am not going to have any thoughts after December 1st. I'm gonna put that out there. I will not answer any questions ever again after December 1st. So my thinking is that it depends on what our commitment is to getting through all of the actions that the task leads put forward or not. If we are okay with not getting through of them, which I feel fairly ambivalent about, I think I'm fine with that, then I would suggest that we go through the forest one and then take, a few minutes of public comment on what we've just gone through, Kaya, particularly if that's how you saw it play out in cross sector. I'm happy to model our approach on how it's worked in other subcommittees. I like consistency. So however you've seen it done in other subcommittees, I would recommend we do the same here so that it is consistent across the council.
I appreciate that. And to just also to acknowledge that with cross sector, this was the entirety of the meeting. So there wasn't still also a different component of the prioritization, which was an important conversation that did have its own, opportunities and reflections that the public might want to weigh in on. So it was slightly different in that sense. So I think, where you'd had the public comment made sense in that first one, you know what I mean? Because it is separate. So whereas having having the first one after going through the process and then having one at the end so they could reflect on the entire experience. And that's probably the mailman. So I apologize if you hear my dog in the background. So I don't want to dismiss what folks are saying here. I'm just not capturing those notes. So however the minutes are going to be reflected if we can. And again, I don't want to ask Jen to try to capture both actions that are happening, as she's not the staff person for this. So hopefully those are being reflected somewhere. Does that also make sense to people?
Due process is not to capture the chat
4 minutes. So I want to say that we've never done that. That's a precedence that we've just never set before. So that was only my comment in the chat, was that I wanted people to feel comfortable to lift up their voice in speaking, so that if there was a comment on the equity, it would get folded in that way. You might, Abby, just as one idea, is you could take a public comment related to the prioritization and carbon budget conversation after this, and then hold comments on the equity work until the end. So
Jan, we already did do that. So we've already had a public comment on the
Oh, sorry.
So I think maybe kind of what I'm hearing from Abby is, I think when we get as far as you want to go through the forestry plan one, maybe that is a chance to do public comment, and then we can go to others. I think maybe it makes sense.
Okay, great.
Just say really quickly, Jake, did you already jump off? I think you did. Okay. I just want to read, I'm going to read in, if that's okay, his last comment here, Kaya, because I think it's relevant and important. Thank you, Kaya, for leading us through this essential and learning a lot through utilizing the tool that we can directly apply to farm to plate moving forward, and would have greatly benefited from in our initial planning process. So just want that.
All right, y'all, go team. Setting trends. So, so again, I don't want to dismiss. I saw that there were some comments from Annette and from John, and Zach and some other folks that wanted to comment. So I was going to actually pause on working on forestry to move on to the other 3 topics that we had. So this could be an opportunity if people want to reflect. If there are members of the public, I mean, that might eat into our time afterwards, but always committee members are, if able to, will stay on beyond the allotted time as available. I will have limited time because I have to prepare for rural resilience and another 3-hour run in just a little bit. So, so I do want to know that I did see those, and we can take this time right now if people want to reflect on either this process. It is your public comment period, so we can just keep it brief, maybe as brief as we can. Just kind of try to be kind to each other as to the work that we want to get done. So that's all I would ask. I'm not trying to censor how much people speak, but just our mindfulness. And I'm going to mute because my dog won't stop barking.
So are we taking comments at this point or not? Is that, have we okay, so John, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I share your confusion. I wasn't clear on that either. Just to, and I get to reiterate what was in my comments. Earlier on, you all were discussing the disproportionate impacts or the impacts upon different communities or sub-communities. I just wanted to, with regard to forest management or mismanagement and their associated ecosystems, just wanted to highlight that there's a disproportionate impact upon our more rural sectors of the state, forested areas of the state, by the tendency to develop those areas for large-scale renewable energy projects. Why? Because their lands are relatively cheap, and so therefore developers tend to go in that direction. It's not because the demand is there or the need is there or the grid is necessarily best suited to accept that power, but solely because the land is cheap and there's more profit in the end. Judy Dow tried to decouple forest management from the economy, and I think maybe these are some of the things she was kind of indicating were a concern. So I just wanted to put that on there, and hopefully maybe you would add that to your list of communities or aspects of community that are impacted. Thank you.
Thank you for that, John. Jennifer?
Thank you, everybody, and thanks especially to Kaya for leading this. One community that I was thinking should be impacted and would be impacted is the academic community. And I'm thinking of forest ecology programs and forest programs. And I'm thinking that they're not inclusive in terms of human communities, and they're also not necessarily inclusive in terms of biological diversity, and that they should be.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Hi. Oh, camera's all crazy. Sorry. Another addition to impacted communities is functional, complete, working ecosystems. So, it's even in the name here. So the ecosystem is an impact. All the various different types of ecosystems are impacted communities, literally. And for negatively impacting, once this goes through, negatively impacting, and something that y'all have to work on, is foresters and people, that are reliant, literally foresters and loggers. So we'll have to figure something out to make it equitable to them. That's it. Those two different additions.
Thank you, Cheryl. Annette?
Good morning. I put this in the chat, but I thought I should say it. In my work in Vermont over the last 20 years, one of the marginalized communities that I keep encountering are the neighbors. So for instance, when I first started doing this work on about a natural gas power plant and pipeline, people looked into it and they came back and said, boy, the deer and the bear have more protections than we do. And this was true for going through forests, its route was insane, wetlands. And more recently with renewable energy projects and also with Act 250, neighbors are vilified. They're called NIMBYs and accused of all kinds of things to stop projects. In my experience, the neighbors know more about the local environment. They have the greatest connection to the land. They should be actually embraced as experts in the local ecology. And so this is something that I'm seeing more and more. It's very disturbing to me to see the rhetoric that's being used, especially by the renewable energy industry right now. I just encountered it last week in a Vermont law school in energy symposium, and I'm offended by it. And I value neighbors. In fact, I think that it's quite accurate to say that neighbors of development projects in Vermont of all types have done more to protect the environment than just about anyone in our state. So thank you very much for hearing my comment.
Thank you, Annette. Okay, Kaya.
All right.
Next.
Well, thank you for this. So would we like to, so the remaining concepts that we have to go through are around river corridors and floodplains. I have food security plans and payment for ecosystems equity review. And the payment, just as a note, the payment for ecosystems equity review, there has been kind of a sub action that hasn't necessarily been like completely put in, but it's an example of one that would require a little bit of description and explanation just to get everybody oriented to it. So just so that you'll know, it might bring some new information or new perspectives that this committee has not previously heard. So where would we like to dive in next? Food security, payment, or rivers? I'm ready for all. I know, Abby, you don't want to have to answer questions. Do you want to take a break and come back to you because you're leading the food systems one?
If anybody has something that they feel really strongly we should tackle right now, let's go for it.
All right. Let's. I can make the executive call.
Or you can make the executive decision, Kyle.
I can make the executive call for sure. So let's look at river corridors and floodplains equity. So floodplains, and so I'm going to share screens for that one. And who are our leads on this one?
Lauren typically, but I believe David is potentially standing in her stead. Do I have that right? Now he's gonna kill me.
So David, all I'm needing for you to do, if you can, is to give us a high-level summary of what this is. So from the notes that I have, the goal of this is to promote healthy, connected river corridors and floodplains, to develop an inventory of priority and critical headwater and floodplain storage areas, to prioritize the investments for restoration and protection in these areas, and to use them to inform compact settlement planning efforts. So if you would not mind doing your best to translate that for folks who are joining us on the call, to be able to have a sense of what that proposal is seeking to do.
Sure. I mean, this goes to one of the key areas of what are often called climate natural solutions. And it goes to more, while there's some climate benefits in the sense of, there are carbon storage as you do restoration work. This is really focused more primarily on the adaptation side of the climate, responding to the extreme weather events, whether it's drought or extreme flooding associated with climate change. And we know that in Vermont, some of the most important resources and assets we have in the state for protecting communities from downstream flooding or to ensure that our groundwater doesn't dry up are to protect the natural systems like our headwater areas and floodplains. So preventing them from being developed and identifying ways to help them become reforested and naturally vegetated so that they have the kind of ecological resilience, that is, they stand up and don't erode and wash away downstream or add to the risks of flooding. But there's also, as we do this kind of work, this kind of restoration work, it typically involves increasing the amount of woody biomass, the amount of plants and shrubs and trees in floodplains and in our headwaters and upstreams. So there's clearly also a carbon storage benefit that's associated with this. So that's, is that helpful? Is that enough? I can kind of give some examples if that would be useful.
Correct. So again, it's really trying to shore up and strengthen our headwaters and floodplains. And as development continues, especially thinking about compact settlement and how it relates to the resiliency of those areas. So it may even include specific projects that will promote the planting of trees and other life forms, other trees and other vegetation, different types of, however they're classified in the forestry world.
I mean, it's a mix of,
to be able to help do that and to strengthen.
Yeah, it's a mix of keeping people out of harm's way in areas where we know that there's flood risks, as well as using those areas through natural restoration in a way that increases their ability to withstand and mitigate the impacts of flooding, or honestly, droughts as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. So, all right, let's dive in, shall we? Okay, so if we're looking here at our document, I appreciate that. I'm going to keep the windows open to the best of my ability while also trying to type at the same time. So, which frontline and impacted communities might be most impacted by this recommendation? So when we're thinking about why we need this, who is struggling the most because of our current practices that are not protecting the floodplains and the river corridors? Who are the individuals? Are there specific regions? Are there?
I would jump in and say anybody downstream is impacted. Any farmers, residents of communities that are on rivers or waterways, and as we saw in Irene, they can be for decades tiny little streams and turn into roaring torrents in just a few minutes. Rochester was a prime example. Another impacted would be the wildlife community in the stream, the fish, the amphibians, the whole plethora of life in the stream.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll throw that out.
Okay, thank you for that.
To
Judy?
town centers that are built in floodways and communities that are allowing, like in the Burlington interval, the development of that floodplain, which would go right back to the biomass plants, Burlington and Reigate.
Okay. You said Burlington and Reigate.
Yeah.
Okay. David?
I think the most important community is the folks that the folks that often in Vermont live in the floodplains tend to be people that live in there might be mobile home communities or people that are living in more marginal housing and they're
When you say
affected.
marginal housing, I'm sorry, are you talking like people who are precariously housed or housing that's not flood resilient?
I'm not sure of the right terminology, but people that are living in housing, it tends, I'm not talking about like, there are certainly people that live in, their little second vacation home or little McMansions. I'm talking about the people that are living in housing that's more modest. So it's not necessarily even economically disadvantaged people, but communities of people that are living in, that are maybe precarious is the right word. They're more, they don't have a lot of buffer in terms of their ability to just move. And so they're at risk both as a result, as a consequence of flooding, and they're also at risk by virtue of this kind of policy proposal. That is, if part of our proposal is to restrict development and housing in these areas, or to even relocate people and move them out, then we have to really have them this community in mind of where can they move, because there's not good options for them otherwise.
Appreciate that. Ryan?
Sure. Thanks. I wanted to, just underline perhaps in the intersection that's going to happen here, John mentioned farmers, and just underscoring that some of the state's best soils exist within this area, those that are most productive and most valuable for agricultural crop production. So the soil type community itself is a reason why we have this intersection of growing food and rivers and floodplains.
Are there certain agricultural sectors, like location based, that you've seen are in danger at this moment? I mean, without saying broadly, are there certain regional spaces where you have a heavy amount of farming and they're just waiting for that for the to be swept away, essentially?
I think this is a pretty distributed potential impact. John referenced Irene. Recovery from Irene included the whole gamut of different types of farm sectors. Vegetable farms that were completely washed away. Lots of losses of corn and other cropland. I just wanted to, I guess, underscore the important area that this plays in farms, and how the vulnerability that exists through climatic extremes and flooding, but also the service that the cropland provides by buffering downstream impacts. So it's a cost and a benefit in some ways, and also just wanting to, I guess I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Judy?
I just wanted to add one more word to what David was saying about precariously housed people in floodplains. There are some towns that actually put senior housing and senior places, yeah, I don't know even what you call them, in floodplains.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do we have any other populations that have been intentionally no, I shouldn't say intentionally. That's part of the environmental justice, components are, thinking about that when we've thought about some of the environmental impacts. Prisons are placed in certain places. Juvenile facilities can be placed in certain places. Even some schools can be placed in certain places without really care for what that's going to have. If you have examples of those, that's something that you'll want to continue to detail here as well. So thank you for that. Abby?
Two things. One, Lauren was just telling me the other day about seeing proposals for low income. I apologize if I don't have the right term, but low income housing that was being proposed in the floodplain. Maybe that will into the seniors. And the other thing that I think that Ryan is trying to get at, that I just wanted to tease out a little bit, I think the farm community is both potentially frontline and impacted by whichever way this goes. In other words, if the floodplain becomes a place where we start to say we cannot be as humans, that will have an impact to the farming community, because that tends to be where some of the most productive soils are. And also that the farmers are impacted by the extreme weather events that happen. And that they also, depending on how the agriculture is managed, can provide co-benefits to resilience. So it's a tricky equation in that regard.
Much better said. Thank you, Abby.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Any other impacted or frontline communities? So do you have a sense who was hit? Who's being hit by Irene, by Sandy, by Hugo, by who's being hit right now? I'm gonna go ahead and put in Windham County. Chris Campany would appreciate that very kindly.
Abby, of course, appreciates that kindly.
Other places?
I was going to say business owners,
Which brings me to my question. In the Burlington interval, they have all these, the Burlington interval is a school, and they teach people how to be farmers, but they're there for 20 or 30 years, so they're well established. So this particular community is constantly building down there. And they are definitely flooded, and their hoop houses, their 18-wheeler trailers, their facilities that they have for storing stuff floats away. Now, to me, this is concerning, because they shouldn't be there to begin with, because their tanks, even their gas tanks, float away. But and thinking of what Abby's saying with the better soil is there, I don't know how to address this or how to say what's impacted, but it seems like they shouldn't be there. They should be going there to farm and not establishing a business there, because they're establishing a physical business in the middle of a floodway, which is different than a floodplain, and it's more prone to be flooded.
Judy, are you really trying to understand? You're really referring to they could farm down there, but they should not be building structures down there.
Correct. Correct.
And I think another impact, and I don't know whether there's what we're seeing around the country, and I'm sure it's happening here, and it's happening with forest fires and everything, is insurance rates for potentially flooded land and everything else is just going through the roof. And, will have a very severe impact on low income people in being able to survive economically in these areas.
And to tie into that, my understanding is that, and I'm not sure, again, this would be sort of the farmer thing where it's a both and in some ways, depending on, but if the policy was built out, I believe part of the theory behind that is that if it was, if the floodways and floodplains and the river corridors were differently categorized, there's a potential that FEMA aid could be, and or insurance rates could be better accessed by those populations that are at risk if the categorization was somehow changed. I wish Lauren was here to help me with this, but maybe David can. I don't really know if that fits here, but I know it's something Lauren has talked about.
It doesn't exactly. I think I get where you're going with that, but so one of the pieces that I think I would want to press or encourage is a greater detail on demographics. So we are talking about the comment specifically thinking about seniors or older adults is an important distinction when we're thinking about frontline communities. Are families most impacted by this? Again, are schools directly in these paths? So that data exists. So we'll want to be able to speak to that as we're talking about who are the frontline and impacted communities, right? And so you may already have that at hand and just haven't pulled that out. But that's the level of specificity that I think would be important. And you might find that, not all seniors across Vermont are all struggling with this, but there are seniors in these specific areas where there are senior living and older adult living facilities that are within floodplains. So that is a very specific community that you want to identify. Does that make sense to folks? Yeah, okay. So I'm seeing Charlie and Judy. I am looking at our time. I am looking at our time, and we're going to keep trucking through and hopefully get to do a little bit of this with some of the other proposals as well. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I just wanted to Abby's point about the impact of the establishment of river corridors on stuff on insurance rates and things. When communities do this work, it also sets them up to be better responding to disasters from a dollars and cents standpoint. The higher ERAF payments for communities following something like Irene or the Halloween storm we had up here, municipalities that do this work end up in a better place because they get higher reimbursement rates following disasters. I hope that makes sense. So there's a net positive to the community for doing the work. Right.
So what I teased out from that though is when we're thinking about who's getting the insurance reimbursements and who's able to access the FEMA money, it does often go back to there's shortages both on the individual level and on the municipal level as far as the costs they're going to take to repair. So I wouldn't say the insurance, I wouldn't categorize those as an impacted community, but that is an impact of not dealing with addressing the floodplains. But so I would say that municipalities as well as individual homeowners.
Yeah, I think it was more just the municipal budget. It's kind of the impact, which affects everything in a community. And so the more resources a community has from an economic level to respond to these, the better it is for the entire community.
Why would that do that to me? Sorry. Okay. Okay. Homeowners. Okay. So, Judy, one more for now.
After Irene, 302 buildings in Montpelier received letters saying their insurance was canceled, and that included 2 schools, and it also included town office buildings.
Okay, So this is good. So again, I'm not assuming in any way, shape, or form that those that have brought this proposal don't actually have this information already. This is what you're going to want to extract from your existing reports or existing demographic information and data that you have to be able to better fill this out and explain that, if that makes sense. Okay. So I am again looking at, we have like less than 20 minutes, well, a little bit more than 20 minutes, but Zoom minutes go really fast. So I'm going to say again, as you can see a little bit of this work, and I know there's some really important questions that we want to be able to consider in here. And I would, we will continue to work on this. This is not the only time that we're going to work on this. We can go through this some more, as well as do some work behind the scenes off camera to continue to try to fill these out, or at least identify. We have no idea where to get the answers to these questions. So that was helpful. I think even just going through that first exercise might be helpful. Is there an additional question that you want to try and tease in the little bit of time that we have? I know y'all are just like, it's all the things. No? Okay.
Also, no, full disclosure, sorry, Jane and I are trying to figure out whether we still have quorum, which I think we do, because Iris is here, she's driving, but she's listening. So I think we still do have quorum. Sorry, logistics.
Well, since we made you unmute while driving, are there any communities that you feel should be added, Iris?
No, I think that's good. I mean, I do have a general question on process, but I'm not sure if this is the time for that, like on process of using this rubric.
Sure.
Okay, so are we doing this as a group, or is it up to the drafters who are sort of doing each section to do this for each of the different strategies and actions?
Good question.
That was going to be my next question, is given Judy, every time I say time, I just look at you and I go, ugh. So given the time and the fact that it is finite at this moment, is there a way that we should spend the last bit we have together with the folks we have remaining to establish where we take what we've done today and move forward, and or how we take what we've done today and move forward? Because obviously we are not going to get to all of this today. And as Kaya has mentioned, we are not going to get to all of this probably ever.
not ever.
Not ever, but
not forever, ever.
We got some work ahead of us. So I think I have sensed that there has been a lot of confusion from people. And of course, now there's not all that many of us here, but as to how to take this and move forward, and or what is our responsibility or our next actions moving forward from today with the equity rubric and the screening. And so maybe if everybody agrees, it's useful to spend the time that we have left framing that out more clearly for everyone now that we've gone through one.
So what I can share, I think that might be important just to frame this so that I don't want to say that there's a right or a wrong way to do this. And so this is different than how we did this with cross-sector, as we'd mentioned before. And that's fine. Like these are the needs of the group. We want to have a deliberative process that everyone is able to be engaged in and understand this. Now, while we're seeing the level of detail that we're trying to tease out, there's going to need to be homework done. Like some of this is difficult to pull out on the fly. Some of this is difficult to do live without having done additional work outside. And I loathe to be the one to give folks extra homework. I loathe to be the one to say, and please do more unpaid labor to get this done. Right? So what I can say is you need to do what's going to be best for your group to maintain trust and transparency through the process. So whether it's having the task leads or the folks who are the leads on this to even just start banging out some thoughts around it, or you do yourself if it feels right for you as individuals to do that. And then when we come back, let's compare notes, let's share and, go across. And again, similar as we would for the public to say, did we get this right? Are we missing anything? What do we still need? That's also a possibility too. So I don't know if that's helpful, or if Jane, if you want to talk about what's happening with cross-sector and how they're still approaching their next steps on this.
Sure, happy to. So, and the context of drafting for Ag and Eco as well will be important, I think. So cross-sector, met as a group and reviewed one as a group, as Kai told you, and then two separately each, and made varied progress on the 5 actions that they reviewed. They actually paused on the equity screening over the course of the last week because they hadn't reached consensus as a group like you all did this morning on their full suite of actions to lift up, and their work goes to the council next week. So they really dug deep and finalized their full body of work yesterday as a subcommittee. And now as they transition into drafting, they'll be using the equity screening to actually review all of their priority actions, but not necessarily coming up with a score. They'll be using it to flag and help them draft the sections of their action tables where they need to speak to the equity assessment for every action that moves into the action table. So I think that where things have shifted perhaps is that there's a varied expectation on like how much, how far they can take the equity screening with the actions they're putting forward because of lack of details in many of the program design. So they'll be speaking to components that they want to lift up to move forward on, and also just recognizing the need and actually stating that is my understanding in the equity table of like must use completely the equity scoring rubric prior to implementation of any program or design. And so that they're using that side by side as they are moving into drafting now for all of their actions and their components for the CAP. And you all have your components due the following Tuesday to the Climate Council, November 2nd. And we met this week with Pat and the subset of you who are focused on drafting. And I think that will be important for all of you to be thinking about as the authors of the pathway and the strategies and actions that you're using the scoring rubric to evaluate the actions that are carrying into the body of the climate action plan, and then speaking to the further work that still needs to be done. And just to put a finer point on that, that the work that still needs to be done is just transitions with Kaya's support last night, hearing from Kaya about how it's going with the subcommittees, really dove deep into what their recommendations are going to look like in the climate action plan about how we continue on past December 1st in implementing the scoring rubric, and thinking about how we do that well, and we'll put forward recommendations in the climate action plan for the council to consider about what we weren't able to get to with the application of the scoring rubric, and how we'll continue to operationalize it after December 1st. And then finally, before I turn it back over to you all, on Tuesday at the council, we're going to reflect on the expectation and hopefully lift up a consensus decision around what the minimum requirement, I should say, is to use for the scoring rubric for carrying the body of the climate action plan, recognizing that not all the actions will have a score associated with them, but we want to speak to how we're using it consistently for the actions that are carrying into the body of the climate action plan. So that'll be on the agenda. It is on the agenda for Tuesday at the council. So I encourage people to participate and hear. Thanks for putting that all in the chat, Pat, too. I see that schedule, which is great.
I guess, Abby and Jane, it comes back to Iris's really good question. What are we kind of asking the writers of the draft chapter for the CAP to try to do with equity in terms of writing, and tied to this really good tool, and realizing that this rich conversation for each of these takes our famous thing, we don't have time.
Cross sector is planning to use it as a guide to screen their actions and then write a few sentences. It's not going deep, but they are planning to use it. I think I heard from Rural Resilience, and that'll be interesting this afternoon to see what they think. But I think they feel differently in that if they can't do it well, they just want to say, like, it needs to be done before the action moves forward. So I think there's varied approaches to how the equity tool is being used.
Does anybody left on the line have any thoughts about how you want that to be handled in our drafting? I think my sort of working theory of it was that I guess I was just sort of assuming that anything that moved forward from the climate action plan, given all of the energy and time that had been put into the guiding principles, the recommendation would be that it would, those actions would need to go through the equity screening and be filtered through the guiding principles, but maybe I'm not entirely clear on that. So for our subcommittee.
Yeah, no, you're spot on that, Abby. I think what Jane is speaking to is that even if you do that, you're clearly going to see there's a bunch of things you're missing. There's things that you need, and there's things in order to do it justice. There's so much more that you'll need, right? And so that's what she's saying, is that the groups are trying to be transparent about that.
Oh yeah, I more meant that even my point was that we won't even get to the equity screening as a group. And so my thinking is that any action that we're putting into our components of the plan need to be with the understanding that prior to any implementation by anyone, the equity work needs to be undertaken. And that would be, so I'm just wanting to make sure that that is the understanding of this subcommittee and that they support that moving forward.
And I guess maybe just another clarifying point. I think it is still asking for you all to try to see where you can't go further. Right? So it's not that you just don't do it. like, don't do it, and y'all need to do it, whoever does it, whenever you do it. But as a committee, that if you are lifting up things in the cap, see how far you can make it. And it might not be that far. And then state that. And state why. And feel free to throw in whatever else you need to whatever other commentary you need to add to that. And,
do you have any thoughts about how that lines up with like the 2 sentences or 3 sentences we have in the cap? That's my question, is like, like from a logistical standpoint, I don't know where that goes. Where does that live, Kaya? Help me out.
Hey, okay. Now I'm the one with the questions. Now I'm the one who has to answer all the questions. Okay, I see how that happened there, Abby.
Judy, go ahead.
I've been saying since March, this equity should not be a box checked off at the end. And that's what we've come to, a box checked off at the end. It comes in the form of a valuation that Kaya's presented here today, but it's the same thing. And it should not be a take it or leave it thing. It should be for everything we put forward. And I'm disappointed this did not come much, much earlier.
I hear that, Judy. I really do. Charlie.
I just wanted to clarify a timeline question. So if this committee's draft is due to the council on the 2nd, and we're going to use, I think, the 28th meeting of this committee to review that language that we're going to send up, then is there I don't even want to ask this, is there a date by which the facilitators and chairs need the drafted language for each pathway? Like Wednesday? I mean, like, we need the committee to have time to review it, right? But I am acknowledging that, like, it's Friday. and we have a lot of work to do, but I want to make sure that our meeting next Friday is valuable, right? So I just want to make sure we set ourselves up for success if that's possible.
Charlie, what we talked about on Wednesday was by noon on October 28th, which I think is a Thursday, they'd be posted. So like released and posted, so people would have a little time to review in the afternoon for meeting on Friday. It's not a lot.
Noon. No. So noon on Thursday for posting, or noon on Thursday for when you want them in your inbox for collation and dissemination.
I'm looking at Abby and Jane a little bit on that. Jane, well, I'll look at Jane. Jane.
Yeah, I sure wish Marion would come back from vacation. I haven't said that on record yet. But I will post them on Thursday. So if I have them by noon, the sooner I have them, the sooner I can post them for you all to have access and read them. I ask all of you, I mean, if I have them by Thursday at noon, I can post them pretty quickly after that. And that only gives you less than 24 hours to read them before the meeting on Friday morning.
And I don't know whether this is a little crazy making for Jane, but I think we'd ask you to try authors to try to get it by noon on Thursday, and then we'll post them as they come, and they may not be, just so people can get on to start reading some things might be the way to do it. It's imperfect, I know.
And that compilation and revision can come after, because for what it'll go to the council won't be posted till Tuesday on the 2nd. So
yeah, and so the plan is to use next Thursday's meeting, all 3 hours, to do the review of that, right? To like, okay. Thanks.
And I would expect, I mean, Kaya, I asked you this, but I know for cross-sector next week, they're hoping Kaya will be back, and they will have done that equity screening on all their actions through their drafting, and we'll be looking to have a process feedback question, conversation about how they're reflecting that work in their drafting and talking about it with Kaya. So I imagine there'll be a critical role for Kaya to play as you've attempted to use the scoring rubric across all your actions through the drafting process. And then I want to say that we're testifying this afternoon to House Energy and Technology, and this is for all of your benefit, what Just Transitions is. And I'm going to talk a bit about public engagement in my opening remarks. And one of the things I am going to lead with and speak about is that the timeline is the most inequitable component of the process. And so I'm going to make that loud and clear in my presentation, and just want you all to know that. And then I also just want to suggest that, and I know this is like maybe not coming appropriately, but this is a high level policy plan. That's what we're getting to. And my hope and anticipation, even though this might not feel it, is that the equity component that we are building now, and have been, through your challenging conversations all along in this process, will very much continue as we think about what of those policies we're even going to do, because it is going to be a very big plan that we're not going to be able to run with everything out of the gate, and that program design and implementation. I hope that we're setting the stage to continue the work in the coming months as we build out these ideas and design these programs and think about equity front and center as part of that. So I hope it's not too little too late. I hope we're building the foundation for work that is ongoing as we implement the climate action plan.
I'm just really time. Kaya, there may be other things you want to make sure you emphasize or share or do before we turn it over to Abby for public comment, but I want to turn it back to you for any kind of closing remarks or like.
Yeah, so thank you. I appreciate that, Patrick. I think you all have done a great job today. I know that this has been difficult, and again, I'm asking you to pull things out on the fly, recognizing how limited your time is to be able to really step into this work, and especially if it isn't your specific area of focus. So I do hope that you found this to be a valuable exercise, and one that I do hope that you will continue on, even again, just to situate your own voice as you're speaking about this work. So just keep keep up the faith. We're going to keep advocating in all the different right and important spaces to ensure that your voices are heard. And so thank you for just staying with the process.
Thank you, Kaya, for your guidance today. We really appreciate your time and efforts. What was I going to say? Yeah, Jane, just a little bit of a plug for the JT component. I think there are some of us that would really love to hear the inequities of what ultimately amounts to unpaid volunteerism on both subcommittees and the council for quite a lot of folks. Okay, so I think we are to the public comment component of this section. So please raise your hands and we'll go from there. All right, Jennifer, take us away.
I just wanted to clarify a couple of my previous remarks. One on the amending of UVA and clarifying and specifying there. So it was section F, so the tab F and number 74 that I was interested in, just being really specific about what that would enable landowners to do in terms of no timber harvest, but still being in the UVA program. And the second thing I wanted to clarify was about equity and academics and thinking about the forest sector and forest ecology, and thinking that if we don't provide opportunities for diversity and equity for teachers in, let's say, K through 12 and in colleges and universities in the state of Vermont, we're sort of perpetuating the systemic racism and systemic inequalities that we do have. And so I think we need to address those. And I don't think I made that quite clear when I spoke first. Thank you.
That's a great point. Thank you, Jennifer. Anybody else that wanted to add anything today? Before we...
I'd like to comment on what Jennifer just said.
Go ahead.
Abby, you and Lauren and I worked with the middle school teachers, and you're spot on, Jennifer, because what people were telling us at this meeting was that they're not even allowed to teach about climate change in their classrooms. So we've got to get educational commitment there. We can teach all we want, but if they can't teach it in their classrooms, it's a problem.
Yep. Cheryl?
I guess I should probably comment on that same thing. Sorry again about the camera. Several years ago, I also reached out to all of the all the science teachers, grade 6 and up in, I don't know, like probably an hour radius around Chester where I live, to see if I could, share with all the science teachers climate change science curriculum. And to all of the ones that addressed me even or commented said, well, we don't have time for it. We don't have room for it. It's not part of the curriculum. We only have to have it if the children are showing an interest, etc. So I think there needs to be more to get that in there, just like Judy and Abby found. There's not a place for it unless I don't know what happens to make a place for it. Something has to happen to make a place for that in education.
And can I just make a comment on this whole, just very briefly? I'm quite familiar with the programs that are done at Shelburne Farms. So, there's a lot of climate discussion that is done there. which hosts an awful lot of schools from across, certainly Chittenden County, Addison County, other counties. So it's not like there aren't pockets of this, and I do not know. I am not an educator, except by accident. And, so I don't know what goes on in the mainstream schools, but I do know, I'm just mentioning that there are pockets of hopefulness out there. And one is what goes on at Sheldon Farms.
You're absolutely right, John, that the problem becomes an equity problem then, because the only ones who can go are the ones who can afford it.
Or who live
Yeah.
near Chittenden County, my friend.
Yeah. Well, Judy, you and I both know who we can talk to about that.
Yep.
Okay, my friends. I think, have we taken all of the public comments for the moment? Okay. All right. Thank you so much for bearing with us and the work that we've done today. And I hope that everybody has a good weekend. And those of you who need to draft things, I would say get to work, myself included.
So that just ruined the weekend.
I know. No rest for the wicked or the weary, but I like wicked better. So, all right. I hope everybody has a good weekend.
So.